but that doesn't mean you should sign off and watch it later.
No, that does not mean that. So let me begin. Welcome to today's session of the Herman P. and Sophia Taubman Endowed Symposium in Jewish Studies. My name is Lee Rothfarb. Everybody knows that. And having begun formally in 1997, these Taubman Symposia are completing their 28th year this year. This is quite long-lived. To get a sense of the breadth and depth of the symposia and thus of their distinction, I encourage you to visit our website and browse through the dozens of past events archived there under the links to events and the link to videos. It's impressive by any standard. Today's symposium finishes out the 2024-25 year in the best of style. Given the readily accessible personalities and obvious contrasting backgrounds of our speakers, their joint presentation as co-authors promises to be as entertaining as it is enlightening. Abby Pogrebin is a familiar figure to us as an author and high-profile journalist. Back in April 2018, she presented a Taubman lecture titled My Amazing, Demanding, Indelible Jewish Year, 18 Holidays, One Wandering Jew, not wandering, wondering. In a version adapted for stage, her first book, Stars of David, Prominent Jews Talk About Being Jewish, played off-Broadway. Pogrebin has moderated public dialogues with Hillary Clinton, Lynn Cheney, Madeleine Albright, and numerous others. Among many periodicals, she's published in The Atlantic, New York Magazine, Newsweek, Tablet Magazine, and The Forward. Rabbi Dov Linzer is best known in entirely different worlds, those of Jewish education and rabbinic authority. For over 20 years, he has been and remains today headmaster of the rabbinical school Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, Yeshiva of Lovers of Torah, also its president for the past 6 years. Rabbi Linzer has authored more than 100 articles on the Torah, hosts several popular podcasts, and is a frequent reference in questions of Jewish law that arise in everyday modern life. A bit about the book. This book is the product of two people literally meeting in the middle to bring us their most honest, intellectual, and relevant understanding of the Torah. It is a conversation starter for families on Shabbat, for religious school instructors with students of all ages, for individuals who have never found a way to read the entire Torah in bite-sized, relatable nuggets. Most of all, the book is a snapshot of what Torah study is meant to be, a real-time, candid, instructive, challenging exchange of responses to an ancient text. For the first time in a single volume, readers can take a tour of the entire Torah through the medium of one challenging, instructive, irreverent, and animated conversation. We're fortunate to have Abby and Reb Dov with us today in the digital world of a Zoom webinar. They are happy to take questions, which you may enter at any time into the Q&A section of the webinar interface. You'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Their book, originally a podcast series for tablet, is now published by Fig Tree Books. It's available through Chaucer's by way of a link in the lower right-hand corner of the flyer distributed for today's events. With no further delay then, we'll now turn the program over to Abby and Rabbi Dov with the theme, Talking Torah Despite Deep Differences. The greatest glue between us is an ancient book. Rabbi, Abby.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here, Lee. Abby, you're on mute.
I said, thank you, Professor. And it is good to at least sense you all, even though I don't see you all. Dov, would you like me to begin? Or
Please,
do you want to say a prayer of some kind?
I pray that we all continue to learn and Torah together and grow from our interactions with one another.
That's beautiful. Wow, I didn't even give you any notice that I was going to put you on the spot. It's great to be back. I'm sorry I'm not here in person this time. I would just say that, Lee, your introduction was really perfect in terms of the unlikeliness of this friendship. I just want to give a shout out also that he mentioned that my first book became an off-Broadway musical, because a lot of people just glide over that fact, even though it never officially opened or was reviewed. It was a wonderful experience, which we can talk about later. although Dove is not exactly, he doesn't warm to theatrical talent. He's all about Torah. So Dove and I met actually 15 years ago at a Jewish conference. It was called The Conversation, which is a very apt title for a conference because that is essentially the headline for our chavruta, our friendship, is that we met at this gathering, which basically gathered about 35 Jewish professionals, clergy, journalists, thinkers, think tank runners, and they asked us to talk about what was on our minds Jewishly. The agenda was really driven by us, but Dove and I kind of kept landing in the same breakout sessions and having really robust conversations, despite the fact that we're very different Jews who grew up in very different Jewish lives, as I'm sure many of you on this call could say. Each of us we know, despite our common inheritance, could write our own book about our Jewish journeys. Dove's and mine do not really intersect at any time until this conference. And we stayed in touch. We struck up a friendship that was really about ideas, projects, things we were working on. When Dove was writing an op-ed for the New York Times, he sought my guidance just because I've been in that journalism world. It's a little more mainstream, a little less from. And when I was working on
Insular, you mean?
When I was working on my second book, which was about the Jewish holidays, I took a deep dive into the entire Jewish calendar. As Lee mentioned, I researched and observed and wrote about every single stop on the Jewish way. I was marshaling a lot of research, a lot of Jewish learning, but I'm not expert. I have great humility about what I don't know. And I really needed an expert reader right at the finish line before the book was kind of put to bed. And Rabbi Linzer, now who I can call Dove because we spent so much time together on airplanes. Dove was my last reader for my Jewish year in an incredibly generous way that turned into its own Havruta, because I would send him a detail about, for instance, before the Seder, you're supposed to take this feather and you're supposed to sweep the crumbs, the chametz out of our cupboards with a candle. Where did the candle come from? What's the feather situation? And, even something I don't want to say small, like it's insignificant, but small in addition to thousands of other things you're supposed to do in preparation. Dove would take the deep dive into text, in tradition, into Masorah, what has been custom, what has been done, and come back to me with, an incredible answer that would then spawn 15 more questions. And you can imagine, multiply that by 18 holidays, a lot of Torah, a lot of Talmud. And Dove is, I call him publicly the Beyonce of Jewish learning, because he's really an extraordinary teacher of teachers. There's many, many hundreds of rabbis out in the world who've been touched by his erudition and command of text and tradition. He's apparently a little draconian in his grading and assessment of his students, although I think he's mellowed over time. But what I would say, it was really his idea that we discuss Torah together publicly, despite our differences, despite having grown up in very different Jewish homes with different kinds of educations, that we start a podcast where we were talking Torah every week. And we can talk a little bit about our personal differences. Maybe that would be useful at some point, but I want to turn it over to Dove, since I haven't taken a breath, to talk about the podcast, which turned into a book, which is now a blockbuster. It takes two to Torah.
Exactly. And then, after we talk about that, we can sort of circle back and also share a little bit about our backgrounds and how they sort of really came from very different places. After we started, when I came really from a modern Orthodox background and took to the study of Torah at a very young age, particularly the study of Talmud. I really loved it. I loved the intensity of it, the way that it was just so stimulating intellectually, and also because I was told how important it was, for a young Jewish man, it was very specifically a man, this was in an Orthodox community, to devote his life to the study of Talmud. And even at a very young age, when I was in high school, I would be, 4 to 6 hours in front of a page of Talmud every day. So much so that when I was walking home from high school, multiple times I would try to be reviewing the arguments of the Talmud in my head, and I would close my eyes to, to sort of say, okay, he said that, and then he brought a proof from over here, and then more than once I would be so taken with the whole conversation with my eyes closed, and I'd walk straight into a telephone call. So, and that was a certain metaphor for my time that year. It didn't stop me from continuing to do it and continuing to walk into telephone poles. But that was sort of my life at that time, which was very deep and intense and immersive, but it came through blocking out the larger world around me. And I continued that way for many years. I went to Israel, studied in yeshivot there, and my 4 to 6 hours became 14 to 16 hours a day. And then fast forward, and my life had opened up a little bit from that very intense period of youth. And about 25 years ago, Rabbi Avi Weiss, who's a name that's probably known to many, if not all of you, a great rabbi for the entire Jewish people, a spiritual activist for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. He believed in a orthodoxy that was much more open and insular than it has usually been, and wanted to start a rabbinical school, and came to create rabbis that represented that and brought that out to the community, and came to me to partner with him and to be the Rosh Yeshiva, the rabbinic head, like the scholarly head of the school. And at that stage in my life, I was thrilled to be able to do that. I really did want to bring the Torah out of the walls of the study hall into the larger community, and could do it through the training of these rabbis who really believed in not just an orthodoxy, and not an orthodoxy about building walls, but an orthodoxy about building bridges. And I did that for about 20 years. I really taught classes, headed the curriculum, oversaw the students. We now have 150 rabbis out there in the communities. But even so, my world had not changed all that much, because even though our rabbis were going out there, I was still in the walls of the study hall. So, and then that changed about 6 years ago when I was asked, Avi Weiss had stepped down from being the president, and I was asked to become the president of the institution. And now it would be not just our rabbis who would go out and bring our Torah out into the larger community. Now I had to go out of the study hall, the Beit Midrash, and bring that Torah out into the larger community as well, and represent the yeshiva to the larger community. And as you heard from Abby, we had such a wonderful relationship of learning Torah together, working on projects together, challenging one another. And I thought, wow, this would be such a tremendous opportunity if we could continue this conversation on an ongoing basis and learn the parsha together and do it in a way to bring it out there to the larger community. So I suggested to Abby that we do this podcast on talking about the parsha, and she was really excited about it. We approached a Tablet magazine who hosted it, and this went on for 2 years. We did every other week, just 10 minutes at a time. Actually, we spoke for about 20 minutes, but it got distilled to its essence of 10 minutes per parsha. So over the course of 2 years, if we did it every other week, we managed to cover the entire Torah. And the project was, people really told us they just so much loved hearing us challenge one another, learn from one another, the warmth, the humor, really pulled them into engaging in the parsha and appreciating what it means to come at it from different perspectives, but to really have an openness and wanting to learn from one another. And then the project was over, and we sort of thought it was done, but people kept on coming back to us and saying, they wanted more of it. They wanted it in another format. They wanted, why isn't it still going on? Have we written it up? And eventually we decided, let's see what that looks like if we try to translate that to the page. So we got it all transcribed. And, the written word, often it's very hard, it's very different than the spoken word. And sometimes you can give a great speech and then on the written page, it doesn't come alive. But we were so pleasantly surprised to see how much did get communicated, and how the warmth and the humor and the challenging and the reflection, all the engagement, all of that really came through. So we spent, a year working on editing it and refining it. And in the end, we produced this, the book, which we are now, has come out about 6 months ago. It Takes Two to Torah. And we really think that it's a very special book on the Parsha because it's not there just to tell you, like, here's our brilliant insights on the Parsha, but we're having a conversation and it's inviting you, the reader, into that conversation. And I think it really is. I don't think there's another book like that.
I will just add that I was raised, some of you may know, by Letty Cotton Pogrebin, who has written quite a bit about her Jewish journey. And I mentioned Mom, although Dad is equally important, just because it was very much I would say, a home-based Judaism, where there was great Jewish pride. We celebrated Shabbat every week. We went to high holidays twice a year, but I was not in synagogue weekly, and we didn't belong to one in a formal way. And I really felt the lack of a Jewish education. I was never bat mitzvah. I didn't learn Hebrew. Wasn't well versed in prayer. It was really when I went to college that I began to feel like I wanted to fill in those blanks. My mother was very much steeped in a Jewish education, and for reasons she's written about, she left it for a while. She came back to observance, but she had the tools. I never had them, and as you all know, if you've never been given the basics and the infrastructure, it's hard to kind of resurrect something. You can choose to whether to step away and come back. I really never had it to return to. So it kind of took a little bit of that DIY experience, do it yourself, where I began to study. When I was writing Stars of David and interviewing famous Jews, I started to study Torah. I became really so just dazzled by the learning that I wanted more of it. So I started a Genesis study group in my living room with a wonderful professor from JTS, Rabbi Bert Visotsky, who's a Midrash professor since emeritus there. And then an Exodus study group also in my living room after the Genesis group, and that was with Rabbi Shai Held and Rabbi Eli Kampfer of Hadar. I became bat mitzvahed at age 40. I joined Central Synagogue, and my kids were raised at a synagogue where I hadn't been. So I was, I say this not to get a trophy. It's more of I was finding my way back in my own way, and my journalism was kind of, in a way, a backdoor method of asking myself questions and getting myself learning that I never had experienced in my childhood. And that was part of the pleasures of working on this book, where we really followed the Torah cycle so closely together, is that I had this incredible laboratory with Dove where I could ask him any question, and we were having conversations, whether it was about the Akedah, where, Abraham is sacrificing his son or almost sacrificing his son, or talking about when Moses doesn't get to ever enter the promised land. I was able to kind of ask every inquiry that occurred to me in a way that I sometimes think is missing when people open up the book by themselves or listen to a Devar Torah on Saturday mornings.
Let me give you something to spin off of by way of moderation here. I'm assuming that, Abby, that you did not delve into the classic commentators of the medieval period or any period in learning Torah, but I know that Dov will have done that plenty of times. So I'm wondering whether such things as Ibn Ezra or Rashi or whomever, Nachmanides, Maimonides, entered the discussion, how that played in your chavrusa together. Even things that might depend upon grammatical readings of the text and etymologies across the text. These are all fine points. And how much did they enter, or at all, in your conversations in coming to some kind of understanding of what the text means?
I mean, I will just say, and then Dove should jump in, that, since these are kind of, friends of Dove's in so many ways, whether it's Rashi or even Ezra, that sometimes these texts would come up, or I would find them in my research, because I researched pretty intensively before every conversation with Dove. So I really was approaching this journalistically in the sense of the discipline of not just flying by the seat of my pants, seeing what's out there, reading, going on Sefaria, which I'm sure many of you have used, which is an incredible source. And sometimes I would see something that I would bring that Dove may be familiar with, but maybe hadn't thought to bring to the conversation. So it was not that I was completely starting from scratch there, but Dove obviously had much more facility with all of those voices. Dove.
Yeah, so I want to first of all echo that. Abby would come really, really armed with the research, and what a lot of the traditional commentaries had said, what contemporary commentaries said, Jonathan Sacks, others, we would not be talking about the whole parsha. We would really decide ahead of time. Like the goal was to not do like a grammatical analysis of the text or a focus particularly on a pshat read. The goal was to say, how does this text speak to us today? How is it speaking to me? How is it speaking to the headlines? How is it speaking to the issues that are going on in the larger world? And, that's a type of an orientation that I did not have before. I was always very much, how does this text speak to other texts? How does this text, maybe say something about the universal human condition, but to really engage it in the larger world? That was the tremendous gift, that Abby brought to the conversation, among many others. And so we would identify one topic ahead of time that we both thought like, oh, we could really sink our teeth into this, and this will lead to an interesting conversation. And that was the one thing we focus on. Actually, so in the book, therefore, you're not going to get a discussion of the whole parsha. Each parsha is only 4 to 5 pages. It's the easiest book to read. Take it with you to shul. And when anything gets boring, just read a few pages. You'll be done with it in a year. And it's really one topic on the parsha, and then between each parsha we summarize all the parts that we're not talking about. But because of that, it would lead to bringing in commentaries as relevant. But the question wasn't, what do the commentaries say? The question is, what is this text saying to me? What is this text saying about the world? And how do I, engage in the commentaries to help me answer that question? It would happen every now and then that, Abby would be citing something from a translation. And I might say, well, actually, if you go back to the original Hebrew, it's more nuanced than that, or you really can't make that claim because that word is actually a little imprecise. So some of those exchanges definitely would happen along the way.
Can we, Lee, just take some questions along the way? If there's anyone who wants to put it, is it better in the chat or the Q&A?
Yes, I invite anybody to use the Q&A and to post the questions, and we'll take them as they come up when there's a lull.
Okay.
Maybe when we're waiting for questions, Abby, we can take turns asking each other questions.
Okay.
So how do you feel about that? You're good at doing that.
Let me start with you. Let me start by asking.
No, I'm going to start. You're usually the interviewer, so I'm going to start.
Right.
I would say, what was one parsha where you felt we really clashed at, and that maybe by the end, we began to appreciate each other's perspective?
I think that I guess I would go to Moses, which I mentioned before. I found that I really could not fathom why, after everything that Moses did, which was basically everything that God asked of him, which, Moses did not welcome the job, seek the job of freeing the Jewish people, delivering them from bondage. That was a big ask. Moses didn't raise his hand. He at first tries to get out of the assignment and Dove. Look, I was aligning you with God. God says, you can handle it, and I'm going to give you the support of your brother. And he does everything that's asked in terms of, getting to the point where they are, wandering in the desert, and those former slaves are incredibly petulant and ungrateful and complaining about absolutely everything, whether they're fetching about the food or the heat or saying it was better in Egypt and we should go back. They build the golden calf when Moses says, wait for me, I'm going to get God's word. And they don't even wait 5 seconds before doubting him. It's just, there are so many turns where they were ungrateful and he advocated for them on their behalf and essentially, won the day when it came to God relenting and saying, okay, I'm going to have more patience than I was going to have. And, it just wasn't an easy road. And obviously there's the rebellion against him. And despite all of that, doing everything that was asked of him, he is not allowed to taste it or touch it. And it's the whole story, it seems, the whole journey is to get there. It just felt unjust to me. And before I say how I came around, Dove, do you want to first just respond to why, to the fact that I felt that I was struggling so much?
No, yeah, totally. I really appreciated, that perspective. And I think that in my learning of the text, Moses has always been such a larger than life figure. We call it like it's Torah Moshe. Moses, the 5 books of Moses. In the rabbinic literature, it's Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Like the whole religion is ascribed to him more than it is often to God. So, so as a larger than life figure, I often lost like the humanity of him. And I think that I so appreciated, how deeply you felt both the, what it meant on a human level that he was not allowed and the profound injustice of that. So that really moved me, when I had before our conversation had really, struggled, as everybody does, with the question of like, what sense does it make? Like, how big of a sin was it to hit a rock rather than to speak to a rock? Like, for that reason, you're not going into the land. But that's more of like a rational, logical question, not an injustice question. The answer that I came up with is that he really wasn't a punishment for hitting the rock. It was really that the hitting of the rock demonstrated that he wasn't the right leader to bring them into the land, because 40 years ago, God had said to him, speak to the rock, and he spoke to it. And actually hit the rock, and he hit it. Now, 40 years later, God says, speak to the rock, and Moses is still stuck in his old ways. He can't break the old patterns. He's still hitting it. And he can't adapt to the new reality. And they're about to enter into a land and have a completely new reality. And you need a leader that can appreciate that and adapt. And it's not just that he's like following his habit. It's what it represents. Hitting a rock represented sort of Moses' style of leadership, was very top down, very authoritarian. You're bringing out a people as slaves. You got to hit them over the head, to get them to listen, to get them to follow. But now they're going to be a free people, and they're going to have autonomy, and they're going to build a country and build a land. And you need a leader that speaks to the people, not that, beats it into the people. You need a leader that can respect this new reality. So God was really saying to Moses, like, your time has come to an end. It's time for the next leader to step forward. And I really do think that is what is going on. But, your insistence on the injustice, made me realize that it doesn't still solve the problem. At the human level, the injustice is still there, no matter how true I believe that larger, goal really was what this was about.
Yeah, and I would just say that one of the things you taught me is, and I've now seen it in so many contemporary instances, is that when leaders don't know it's their time to step aside. We obviously just saw this with the last election, but it really was a Moses moment. And I'm not aligning Biden with Moses. I'm just saying there was such a reluctance to go. And even if his supporters were kind of saying, we need a new voice for this time, and, I've seen it where rabbis hold on too long. I mean, people even that have a great constituency, that there's also a sense that it wasn't just the leader that needs to be changed, but that this was a people that had only known slavery. And that for that reason also, this was going to be a kind of transition point that required maybe not Moses, who had seen the before. He couldn't necessarily make a new society when he was kind of carrying the bondage lens on this people. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I think that's just such a challenging idea. So maybe it didn't fully change my mind, but you adjusted my thinking.
And I want to just add one point while we're talking about Moses, which is that, whenever Moses comes up, or not whenever, but so often, Abby, you would say, that how moved you are by the model of the reluctant leader. Moses consistently refusing, and God having to, insist. And again, that's just a point that, obviously I know the story, but, I'm so eager to sort of get to, the end of the story. So Moses goes and he takes them out and he leads them out, that I don't think, the power of what that means to be a reluctant leader and to do, and what that means about the type of leadership you're going to bring. And I also think it's a really important message that we need nowadays about the types of leaders that, that we as a people can use.
100%. I just want to read a question that came in, and thank you, anonymous attendee, for writing one. We encourage them. Abby, if you would care to share, I would love to hear more about your motivation and experience becoming bat mitzvah at 40 years old. Were you bat mitzvah solo or with a group, and how did you feel upon completing your bat mitzvah? So whoever's asking that, I so appreciate it. And I will say, without hyperbole, it was one of the high points truly of my life, and very unexpectedly so. I did it by myself. I will say that I am one of those type A people that doesn't want to wait for others. It was part of it. And I say that not that I wouldn't want, I do a lot that's collaborative and I love being in groups, but this was one of those times where I felt like the only way I was going to really be able to do the preparation was to do it sort of on my own clock and my own time. And it was really the rabbi, it was a rabbi named Jennifer Krause, who's wonderful, who even put the idea in my head. I was studying Torah without Dove, sadly, but I wanted more of it. And I went into kind of the second year of studying. And she said, you should become a bat mitzvah. And I said, that feels indulgent at age 40. Like, why would I do that? And she said, well, because it's yours, like it's yours to claim. And it would be meaningful, but I think it's also going to make you feel like it's a milestone that begets more learning. It wasn't about being done. It was about part of the continued exploration. And I like that idea, that it was kind of a doubling down, a signing on, with great humility for what I'd missed and didn't know, to keep going, to continue. So I did it at a place called Angel Orange Sands. I don't know if any of you know it. It's one of the oldest synagogues in New York on the Lower East Side. It's incredible physically in there, but it's very raw. Like, it has not been renovated. You walk in there and you literally feel like you're in, the early 20th century. But, with a little bit of a lighting here and a flower arrangement there. I had my bat mitzvah and I wasn't even going to have like a luncheon. That felt like, who am I to have a party for myself? But it was truly to have my children there, to have them be part of the service, to have to study and prepare for the Parsha and the chanting and listening on the subway over and over again, to get the cantillation down, to really learn that. It was extraordinary. So it's one of those things where, I sometimes see Jewish learning as these muscles that we were all given with, and some of us start to exercise them and some of us leave them dormant. And this felt like, oh, this muscle's been sitting here, and now I've learned how to work, to basically work it out. And it gives back every step of the way. I felt like some force was walking with me. So I can't recommend it more highly. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. Abby, when you were talking about how the rabbi told you that this is yours and you need to own it, that really reminded me of what Rabbi Angela Buchdahl told you when we started our project. Do you want to share that?
Well, thank you for prompting that. I think basically when I was starting this project, my Rabbi Angela Buchdahl said that her only caution was that I not just be the student who's kind of like thirsty for learning and saying to Dove, oh, teach me, oh sage. Though I do say that to Dove all the time. I call him oh sage, but that I could get, and I often would, default into the let me just ask you the questions, because I have so many questions and it's so interesting for me. What could I possibly offer? And that's not just false humility. That's just like the facts on the ground, or that he's lived this and taught this for his entire adult life, even going back to when he wasn't quite an adult. And I'm, 20 years in, it's a much less time. But I will say that that was great advice. And it was advice that Dove gave me too, which is that he would often, as you've already seen on this, say enough already with your interrogation. It's time to switch the tables. And it not only made me feel like, yes, Abby, you have something to say that's valuable. It was just a reminder of, I think, why this Torah conversation has endured, and why I think the book has been as resonant as it has with people, is that we're inviting people into a real conversation in real time. Like, wherever you are in your life, Torah is happening. It happened to be happening during the pandemic when we were doing this, during the George Floyd reckoning, which is when we were doing this. But my goodness, to have the Torah conversation now, post October 7th, is a whole other conversation that really would not change the Torah, but change the lens on the Torah. And that's its magnificence, is that no matter what pain we're in, or whether there's joy, this is just these stories and these characters and these tenets are not just speaking to us, but challenging us, demanding something of us in every hour.
Thank you. So, Abby, there's another question in the
wait,
in
I'm
the
hearing
Q&A.
Lee. I'm hearing Lee.
I think Rabbi Dove's just picked up on it. He was mentioning the same. Another question popped up, and
So maybe we'll answer that, and then Abby, it'll be your turn to finally ask me a question.
Okay.
So the question is, did you have disagreements on the role of women in Judaism? So, I mean, I guess I'll start with this, and can answer this in like two ways. One is basically where we stand religiously, and then just in our lives, and then the other is in the context of the text. One of the things that makes the yeshiva that I had, Torah, stand out in the Orthodox community, to sort of the more open and inclusive Orthodoxy that Rabbi Weiss was the vision that the yeshiva was founded on, is the desire to really maximize women's participation in the synagogue, in ritual, in religious leadership. We really have been at the forefront of that for many. When we started, that was, I think, one of the primary reasons that people were so excited about us, was here we were trying to create greater space for women within Orthodoxy. And now, about 14 years ago, we started 25 years ago. Rabbi Sarah Horowitz, together with Rabbi Weiss, created the Maharat, which is a rabbinical school that ordains Orthodox women, the first rabbinical school to do so. And they really now are so much at the forefront of that. As we remain supporters and rabbinic allies and colleagues in that endeavor. So all of that is deep, in terms of our ethos and values. And that being said, we also are really committed to orthodoxy and traditional halacha. So that means that if you go into our synagogues, you will have you will still see a mechitza, you'll still see a minyan defined as counting by 10 men. But everywhere that it is possible within a halacha to increase women's, participation and involvement is something that we really work to make happen. I just mentioned that I'm married to Rabbi Dvorah Zlotkower, who's like a major Talmudic
You said that too fast. You said that too fast.
Dvorah Zlotkower, major halakhic and rabbinic scholar, probably the greatest, female rabbinic scholar in, of our day within the Orthodox community. And she teaches at our rabbinical school. She teaches halacha. She's the spiritual, she has the role of spiritual guidance, Rebbe teacher. And for a woman to be teaching at a men's Orthodox rabbinical school is really unheard of. Just as unheard of it is for an Orthodox rabbi and a Reformed journalist to be talking to her regularly together. So I think, one last thing I guess I'll mention is, one thing that's been happening for like the last 10 years, maybe even more, 15 years in the Orthodox community has been the phenomenon, or in small segments of it, but the segments where our rabbis are found is the phenomenon of partnership minyanim, which is not the same as an egal. Again, it still has a mechitza, but women will read from the Torah, women will get aliyot, women will lead parts of the davening, not all parts of the davening. So, so I think we really are coming from a very similar place in terms of values, but I also have commitments that I am, and in terms of my orientation towards halacha and orthodoxy, that lines that I can't cross.
But can I just say, Dov, I want to pick up on that, because that was going to be my question. If you could give those here an idea of where you ran into some resistance in your community about doing this project.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Right, because, many people, as I just said in passing, it's very uncommon for an Orthodox, male rabbi to be in regular conversation about anything with a woman in public that's not his wife, and in regular Torah conversation, certainly with anybody that is not Orthodox. That is, outside of, again, the space where our rabbis are creating, but in the standard Orthodox space, that would be verboten and taboo, unheard of. Definitely people have asked me, were you afraid that in doing this project, you were going to get attacked? And, my answer was, at some level, well, no, not that I didn't think I would be attacked, but people had been attacking me for so long, for the last 20 years, for everything I stand for in terms of a more open and inclusive orthodoxy, that like it didn't even bother me that they would be against this. I deeply came from a place that it's a principle that Maimonides says. He wasn't the first to say it, but I'll say it first in Hebrew. It's kabel et ha'emet mimi she'amro, which is receive the truth from whoever says it. That our teachers are everywhere, and we can learn from, and I've learned so much, from my chavruta with Abby, and like, why should we not engage people just because they're not exactly like us? So I wasn't really concerned about that. I will tell you that, like, about 10 years ago, there was a book that came out, which was an Orthodox rabbi, and I think it was Orthodox and Reform rabbi, sort of different takes on the Torah. It was not the same as ours by any stretch of the imagination. But anyway, they were going to go on a book tour. And right before they began the book tour, this Orthodox rabbi got attacked so viciously from the right-wing Orthodox world that he basically dropped out of the book tour. So they had a Reform rabbi going around trying to pitch a book that was about engagement with an Orthodox rabbi who wasn't there to be on the tour with him. So I never did that to Abby, even when they attacked me. But I will say what I wasn't expecting was I got some pushback even from within our community. Some people who are supporters wrote and they said, I don't understand what the point of this project is. Like, why is it appropriate for you to be talking Torah to somebody who doesn't, observe like you observe, doesn't observe traditional Shabbat, doesn't observe traditional kashrut? They probably even said it harsher than that. So, but they were not coming at a place of attacking and tearing down. They genuinely didn't understand, it was out of their normal experience, and they didn't understand why this could be of value. And I engaged them, and I said, I really appreciate your perspective. I understand where you're coming from. Let me tell you why I think this is important. And the amazing thing is that they wrote back and said, thank you so much. I really understand now, why you're doing this project. So, when somebody is there, has questions and challenges, but is open, you can really bring people along.
Just to follow up on that, did what I would think of as ideological differences between the two of you, did those crop up in your contrasting understandings and maybe lead to some impasses?
Yeah, you're talking about ideological differences. Yeah, I think that I would say, one of the major, I would say, like, gaps is just that Dove is much oriented towards this text as divine. I consider the Torah to be sacred, absolutely. But by sacred, it's not a blueprint for my life the way it is for him. And so that means that there's ways in which we would come at this conversation, and sometimes I would assume a more kind of human hand in some of the shaping of what we were reading than he feels or is comfortable saying or believing. So that's a pretty big difference, to think that a text comes from God or comes from, humans who are informed by belief. So that was one thing. And then, that said, I think that Dove was willing to be critical of characters in the Bible, but not to be critical of God in any way or anything that God did or does. And that means that when there was a difficult text, and I would kind of say, how is this, how do we square this with what we're supposed to take away, which is essentially a positive idea of how to live? I felt like sometimes Dove was kind of contorting himself to get to a justification. in ways that maybe he hadn't thought of as contortion before. Dov, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that was probably the core difference throughout, which is our orientation to this. You Abby, treated as a sacred text, as we both treat it as a sacred text. But my understanding of that sacredness is a text sort of directly given by God, and that means that when we deal with really difficult passages. One in particular is the one about the Sota ritual, which is we're actually going to come up to in about 3 weeks or so, and that's in the beginning of Numbers. It's the Parsha Naso, the second Parsha in Numbers, and that's about how a woman who the husband suspects her of committing adultery, and he has no basis for his suspicions. The verse says a spirit of jealousy passes over him. He's able to take his wife and drag her to the temple and have her undergo a ritual where a priest reads out these curses from a parchment and scrapes the ink into a vessel that has water and dirt and the ink, and she has to drink this. And the verse says that if he's innocent, then if he's guilty, her thighs will fall, her stomach will distend, and if she's innocent, nothing will happen, and she'll go home and she'll bear a child. So this is and she's made to undergo this completely degrading, debasing ritual. So it's very hard to understand, right, how a divine text given by God, as I understand it to be, could be saying, dictating that this is the way that we are supposed to behave. This is the ritual we're supposed to do. And I think, Abby was able to sort of say, well, okay, I can just sort of say this is a text that I really find disturbing. End of story. There's nothing to reconcile. I believe it's sacred, but it doesn't mean that, that I have to agree with it. And my question sort of to her is, well, what does it mean that it's sacred and you don't agree with it? What does it mean it's sacred and you don't find it binding? But for me, it was, if I do treat it as binding and something that I have to believe is from God, so how am I going to deal with something so profoundly difficult? And if you, for the sake of time, I won't give my whole answer, but you can go ahead and read that chapter in the book, and you can see how I answer it, and you can see how Abby feels that I am totally pretzeling myself to try to give that answer. I'll give one more example, though, about where this sort of ideological differences play out. And, it goes back to that question about feminism and women's roles. I think it's interesting that Abby would often actually, you can speak for yourself, Abby, but as the woman in the room and somebody who comes from a family that really represents a lot of a strong belief in feminism, I think made a point of not always raising the feminist angle. And sometimes I would be the one that would sort of raise the feminist angle and the feminist critique, At the same time, there was one time that we had an exchange where Abby sort of said, well, how do you deal with this misogynist text? And I said, Abby, I don't feel comfortable framing it that way. I could say a text that I experience as misogynist, but I can't call it a misogynist text because I can speak about my experience, but I can't feel that I am standing in judgment over the Torah and, and judging it, negatively. That is not a comfortable position for me to be in. So that is, and we sort of felt our way in how to have this discourse with our different perspectives, but in a way that didn't push buttons that made it uncomfortable to be in the same room.
Since we have 10 minutes, should we go? Any questions?
Yes, if there are questions, this would be the time to post them. And I was going to kick off with this, and while questions are coming in, perhaps, maybe not. How did you feel at the end of the 2 years it was that you developed this, parsha by parsha, in looking back over the work and thinking about maybe drawing it all together? How did the two of you feel about that becoming a book and what its place would be?
I mean, it's been just the most incredible kind of constant window opening, wonderful, unexpected ride. And I think it's part of what is the kind of the glory of Torah, is that it brought together two very different Jews who not only had this conversation, but then had to spend a year kind of re-wrestling to put it on the page, then seeing how it really is very alive when you read it. People are sometimes reading my part and his part out loud. Sometimes there are, informal chavruta at their kitchen table. Families are doing it together. Sometimes people in synagogues are having more formal community reads together. The way it's being used could not be more gratifying. And then I think also that in this time when we're so polarized and people are not able to have these conversations across differences, it is the antidote, I think, to divisiveness and, the inability to talk to each other, because this is not just modeling, but was genuinely the discipline of coming together, no matter how we pray differently or believe differently. We are joined by a fundamental love of Judaism, frankly, love of Israel, and a love of learning. So I think that those are the common denominators, even with plenty of time that we clashed. And then just the travel. I will just say the fact that we've gone to all these places, over 35 events, has been extraordinary. And a shout out to our speaking agent. We've made her absolutely insane this year because we've crisscrossed the country. And that's just been surprising, gratifying how many people invited us and were welcomed us and prepared for us in these fascinating, wonderful ways. And that's just, the snapshot of Jewish life is strong.
I think what you said about contrasting views coming together is very important.
Thank you.
Very important.
Yeah.
Richard asked the following: to what degree do you think of what you have done as a model for others? I guess you sort of have answered that a bit, but.
Dov, do you want to say anything more about other people doing it?
I'm sorry, I was reading the questions and I wasn't seeing it. Could you repeat the question, Lee?
To what degree do you think of what you have done as a model for others?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are really hoping is that this book will inspire others and show people that this is possible. We right now, as I think Abby was saying, so often live in our silos, live in our echo chambers. We all know how that phenomenon has only increased because of social media. And it doesn't mean, and we wind up not growing and just hearing our own views reflected back to us. It is a little scary and challenging to step out of that. And I'll just be honest, I will also say that I think that if Abby and I were very different in terms of our values, it probably would have been a more complicated in depth. We are very we're both pretty liberal socially, but we deeply care about Judaism and Torah and tradition. So there was enough that we shared that made it more possible and didn't make it descend into a shouting match. So I think that that's important, to find the right degree of difference that will allow you to have very productive conversations. But wherever we go, people are telling us how inspired they are by this. And as Abby said, some people have actually used the book to model to different people to play parts and to actually actively model how we can have these conversations and discussions. Our next hope is that people will consider using it in day schools and Sunday schools as a way of teaching the parsha and as a way of modeling, what it really means to have an open and curious approach and wanting to, engage and not just learn the material that you're assigned.
I love the one picture that I received, which I think captures this exact mood, with the two of you back to back, obviously having a disagreement, but in such lighthearted fashion with big smiles on your faces. That to me captured it right there.
Thank you. Thank you. It is also true that we crack each other up, and that also was a really important part of the relationship.
You see, Rabbi Dov, there's a question for you in there. This is a live wire question.
With her feminine perspective of Torah, including the parsha that you referred to in Numbers. Yes, I think that.
Dov, you got to repeat a question slowly.
I'm sorry. Thank you. See, Abby also doesn't hesitate to give me direction. Rabbi, does your wife struggle with her feminine perspective of the Torah, including the parsha that you referred to in Numbers? Thank you. And the answer is yes, she most definitely does. So much so that I hope you'll consider next year or 2 years from now, when she comes out with her book, having her on, because she is writing in the middle of writing
amazing.
Yes, and a big shout out to Abby, who has been such an enormous help to her and in that process. And she's writing a book about how she brings together both a very frum, traditional mindset and personality and world, together with a really strong feminist one, and they don't always sit next to, well alongside one another. So it's really been a lifelong struggle for her, but also which makes her the profound and wise and unique individual that she is.
I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions to come through. We'll give it a minute. But at the end of this, or anticipating the end pretty soon, I want to thank you both for taking the time today for a really lively discussion, very entertaining. I knew this was going to happen.
Thank you, Lee.
To both of you.
Thank you, Lee.
Really wonderful to have this as the capstone event for the year. I wish you could have been here in person. We'll have to think about that another time, but that would be wonderful to have the both of you here and have that infectious spirit infect the congregation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you
wonderful
all.
to connect to all of you, even if we could not see your faces. So hopefully next time in person.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Be well.
Let me remind everybody in closing here that this will be available within a week, probably, certainly no more than that, as a tape, as are all of the recent and more distant presentations as video. The flyers are often available as well. So we hope that the listening audience and others, your friends, go to the Taubman website, taubman.ucsb.edu, and explore the site under videos and under events. You'll find things there, your friends, etc., that you've met before through Taubman. And we appreciate your support and hope it continues. So thanks once again, and hope to see you again on familiar topics. Thank you.
Take care. Be well.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.